Let's talk about a special story. The United States has handed India a slightly better rank when it comes to protecting intellectual property, but India still remains in the bottom half of the rankings. The Global Innovation Policy Center of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce releases annual ranking on how countries are faring on protecting trademarks and patents. This year, India has been ranked 44 out of 50 nations. Now, this is a marginal improvement, yes, from last year when India was ranked 43rd out of 45 nations. India has been given an overall score of 30. This is well below the regional average of 52. But this is better than the average of bottom third nations. Now, remember, the top 5 nations average a whopping 93 on that very index. The United States has been ranked as the best nation in protecting intellectual property. United Kingdom, Sweden, France and Germany complete the top 5 best performers. The United States has lauded India for taking a few steps to improve intellectual property rights regime, but India is still the worst performing nation among the BRICS, and China within the BRICS is for now the best performer. Well, we are now joined by the lead of this very study. Patrick is joining in. Patrick, thank you so much for joining in on the show. You were on this very show a year ago. Let me start by asking you, before we go into the fine print, I want to understand the standards that have been used for this very study. India hasn't agreed to the US standards, and the US IPR and India IPR are completely different. India agrees to the TRIPS agreement. So I want to understand, is it really fair for India to be ranked on a standard that India doesn't really use?
Hi, Shireen. Well, thank you, and it's great to be back on again with you. Appreciate the opportunity. You know, there are all sorts of standards in the world, some of them set through multilateral treaties, some through trade agreements, and most of them just through the laws and regulations that individual countries establish for themselves. And the point of this index is simply to help countries understand where they stand on that range of standards in relation to their peers. So India can look at this index and know where it stands vis-a-vis China or Brazil or Russia or the United States, for instance.
But Patrick, just to put this into perspective, you know, if you look at the public healthcare system in US versus India, it's completely different. So when India agrees to the TRIPS agreement, and this is something that has been put forth by the IPA as well and submitted to you, I want to understand, why not take the TRIPS agreement, which US is also a part of? Why look at a standard which is something that India hasn't taken into or hasn't agreed, and use that to still put India on the priority watch list?
If you look at the rankings in our index, and we ranked 50 countries this year, you'll see that every single country achieves a different score. Out of a total possible 40 points, you've got everything from Venezuela at 6 to the US and UK at over 35. And the point is, countries are making their own sovereign policy decisions about how they want to promote and protect innovative and creative activity in their own economies. And the index is an opportunity to see how you compare with those other economies. When we looked at the TRIPS agreement, which was put in place in the World Trade Organization 25 years ago to govern intellectual property, we found that doing nothing except implementing the TRIPS provisions would get you about 15 points on our index, which is not a very competitive situation. So TRIPS is a good minimum standard, but for countries that want to lead the global knowledge economy, as I know India does and potentially can, TRIPS is not the answer.
Hi, Patrick. This is Ashmit Kumar from the New Delhi studios. Just a question here. One of the key points that has been troubling perhaps the IPR regime has been the issue of compulsory licensing. But let's put that into perspective. The Novartis case was one that led to alarm bells being sounded. But post that, there have been 2 applications made before the controller of patents. Both of them have been rejected. Both have been struck down, and they have not been granted the compulsory licensing case. So India has been responsible, at least in terms of exercise of the legislative powers at its disposal. Is this criticism then perhaps fair, that India is on the issue of compulsory licensing, but it has been acting responsibly. Only 3 applications have been made, of which 2 have been rejected.
That's a great point, and thank you for raising it, because the whole purpose of having intellectual property rights in law is to encourage innovative and creative companies to take risks. You mentioned the healthcare space. The process of bringing a new drug to market, from basic research to testing, safety and efficacy testing, product development, takes many, many years. There might be, in any individual company's pipeline, there might be 20 drugs, and by the end of the day, you have one that can actually make it to market. So it's a long-term investment, it's a high-risk investment, and it's very, very capital intensive. Some studies have shown that it costs upwards of $2 billion to bring a single drug to market. So if we want new cures and we want new treatments to reach patients, we have to find ways to encourage that risk. And when you issue compulsory licenses, or even just talk about wanting to use those types of measures more aggressively, those sort of regulatory takings, then you disincentivize the risk that has to happen in an innovative economy.
Right, Patrick. Let me also come across with another question to you. While there are concerns, as you said, the US IBC has expressed concerns over the IPR regime in India. But number one, the report itself recognizes that the courts here have been proactive. More recently, there have been many judgments. But this question is specifically with reference to the situation on the ground. Just a broad look at the FDI that's come in. Last 10 years, that's $320 billion. Last 5 years would be $163 billion. And what's interesting is that over 42% of the investment is coming into spaces such as pharma, such as automotive engineering, such as IT, and these are spaces that are traditionally IPR heavy. So the situation on the ground not really being commensurate to the concerns being expressed. Is that a fair criticism?
I was in Delhi just a couple weeks ago. They held the Raisina dialogue, and Prime Minister Modi was there, along with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. And I had the chance to speak on a panel with India's Commerce Minister, Suresh Prabhu. And I said to him that I believed, just as the United States led the global economy after World War II, and that China had done so after over the last couple of decades, that India could be the next engine of global growth. And I think what's happening is that industry recognizes that. The Modi administration has begun to put in some steps that could make it a reality, but it's not inevitable. The next global driver of growth is going to be an innovation-founded economy. It's not going to be what China did by low-wage manufacturing. So it has to be premised on strong intellectual property rights that create the incentive for risk-taking. So
I get that point, Patrick, but let's look ahead now. Let's look ahead.
We can't take them as an inevitability. Yeah.
Fair enough. Let's look ahead then. What exactly would it take, Patrick? If you could give us a 2-line answer, what will it take for India to be removed from that priority watch list? And how long? How long would you expect?
India needs to reverse the market psychology that has, well, I think some very important first steps have been taken with the national IPR policy, and we've seen some base level measures aimed at IP awareness raising, streamlining registration of rights. But what we ultimately need to see to set it all in motion is a clearer signal from the government that we're going to respect intellectual capital and intellectual property rights, so that innovators will take the risks in India, that they'll locate their innovative activity in India going forward. That's going to be the market where they
and hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later. Thank you so much, Patrick Kilbride. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time, so we will have to wrap up this conversation. But I appreciate you taking us the time.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks a lot. So we'll have to take a very, very short break. But up next,